Life is an amazing thing. You never know what to expect from it. What seemed like a real tragedy to you before can bring incredible pleasure today. I returned home and saw that my wife was sitting with a man on the couch, and after a couple of minutes she handed me the divorce papers and left. I'm broken. Colin Aldrich never saw it coming. Everything in his life seemed to be going perfectly. 6 months ago, he received a promotion at work along with a substantial pay raise. Celia's interior design business was flourishing, and she was now significantly contributing to their family income. The house they had bought 2 years ago wasn't extravagant, but it was spacious enough for their needs and situated in a good neighborhood. He and Celia had even begun discussing starting a family. So, he wasn't expecting trouble when it suddenly confronted him. Colin couldn't help but notice the unfamiliar car parked in front of his house, but its presence didn't worry him. However, he became concerned when he entered from the garage and found Celia sitting in the living room with another man. When he walked into the room, she stood up immediately, and Colin couldn't help but notice how slim and attractive she looked. It was only when he focused on her face that he realized she appeared nervous. "Hey, sweetie," she greeted him. Then she gestured towards the man still seated on the sofa. "You remember Vince Callahan," she said. "He's a client of mine. I've been redecorating his office. You two have met before." "Oh yeah, I remember now. Hi Vince, nice to see you again. What brings you here?" Vince glanced at Celia uncomfortably and she cleared her throat. "Damn, this is so hard," she said quietly. Then she took a deep breath as if bracing herself for what was to come. "Sweetie, there's no easy way to say this. I'm leaving you." The words made no sense to him. "What did you say?" She shook her head sadly. "I know this is a shock, but I filed for divorce." He half stumbled to the chair facing the sofa and sat down heavily. "What? Why?" "We didn't intend for this to happen," she said regretfully. "But Vince and I have fallen in love. We've been seeing each other for a while now, and we don't want to keep our love a secret any longer." "You've been having an affair?" Colin asked, dumbfounded. She quickly glanced at her lover. "We didn't plan for it, but eventually we couldn't deny our feelings for each other. Anyway, I've already packed some of my things in the car. I'll come back for the rest later." But, Colin stammered. She ignored his faltering objection and handed him an envelope he hadn't noticed before. "Here are the papers and everything. I've tried to be very fair with the settlement, but just so you know, I did take half of our savings. You'll want to get your own lawyer to review these. If you have any issues, they can contact my lawyer. I've attached her card to the notice." Confused and bewildered, he accepted the envelope, still trying to make sense of the situation. As he sat holding it, she walked back to Vince's side and took his hand. Vince stood up and the two of them moved towards the door. "But why? What?" "I've already explained," she cut him off. She nodded at Vince, who opened the front door. She turned back one last time. "So, I guess we're leaving now. And Colin, I'm really sorry. I want you to know it wasn't you, it was me, okay?" Then they were gone, taking with them the happiness he had known for the past 8 years. Colin had always seen himself as a composed individual. In workplace emergencies, he had always managed to calmly and swiftly analyze the situation before determining a plan of action. But today, that ability abandoned him. His thoughts were now in disarray, leaping from one topic to another, unable to focus on any single one. How did I not see this coming? Where can I find a reliable lawyer? How will I prepare for the meeting with Ferguson tomorrow morning? I wonder if Celia has planned anything for dinner. How will I ever get through this? His thoughts kept racing, looping endlessly, each demanding his attention until he clutched his head, trying to silence them. In desperation, he struggled to his feet and made his way back to the bedroom. Shedding his clothes and leaving them where they fell, he crawled into bed, mentally exhausted. Remarkably, he soon fell asleep and stayed in bed until morning. When he woke, the mental chatter had subsided, but the new reality of his life was evident everywhere. He immediately noticed Celia wasn't beside him, and when he went to get dressed, he saw her side of the closet was empty. As he walked to the kitchen to make coffee, his footsteps echoed in the empty house. Even when he looked out the window, the North Carolina morning appeared noticeably gloomier. Vince Callahan woke up to find Celia staring at the ceiling with her hands behind her head. "What are you thinking, baby?" he asked. "I was thinking about Colin," she replied. "I hope he's okay." "He's going to be fine," Vince replied casually. "I hope so," she said. "He seemed to be in shock when we left. I feel guilty about it. Not that he was a bad husband. It just got a little boring, you know." "Well, that won't happen to us," he promised. "You're going to have a lot of fun." With these words, he began to kiss passionately. "Oh, Vince, yes," she gasped, and memories of last night came flooding back to her. All thoughts of Colin quickly dissolved into a sensual wave. For most of the day, the envelope Celia had given Colin sat on his desk at the office. When he could procrastinate no longer, he opened it and began reading the divorce petition and proposed financial settlement. However, it was hard to focus on the dry legal language because he didn't want a divorce in the first place. All he wanted to do was lay his head on his desk and cry, but he didn't want anyone in the office to see him like that. After a few minutes, he got up and slowly walked down the hall to his boss's office. She had hired him long ago, and he considered her his mentor. She looked up when he knocked on the door frame, then looked more closely. "Are you okay, Colin? You don't look so good." With a pained expression, he asked, "Do you know a good divorce lawyer?" "Oh no, Colin, not you and Celia. Sit down." With that, she got up and closed her office door. Then she sat in the chair next to Colin and put her hand on his forearm. "Tell me what happened," she asked with obvious concern. This time, Colin couldn't hold back his tears. When Colin finally met with the attorney his boss had recommended, he soon regretted it. The lawyer bluntly advised him to accept Celia's offer and move on. "But I don't care how good her deal is," Colin argued. "I don't want a divorce at all, let alone pay her to leave me and live with someone else." The lawyer sighed. "Look, you need to think logically about this. You can't force your wife to stay if she wants to leave, and honestly, you wouldn't want to be stuck with an unhappy wife. As for paying her, you need to see it from my perspective. Celia, it is Celia, right? Is only asking to split your current assets. She's not even asking for alimony because she plans to remarry as soon as the divorce is finalized. Believe me, I've seen wives go after their husband's retirement accounts, demand crippling alimony, and petition for most of the family's assets, including the house. Your wife is being reasonable. Don't anger her and make her vindictive." "Maybe so," Colin said stubbornly, "but I still don't want a divorce." The attorney nodded sympathetically. "Listen, Colin, you don't want marriage counseling from a lawyer. First, I'm not good at it, and second, I charge much more than a marriage counselor. If you're not ready to sign, my advice is to find someone who can help you work through your feelings." When Colin informed his boss about the meeting, she surprised him by giving him a business card. "I had a feeling you might react this way after our conversation. I believe you should see Dr. Helmar. He's a psychologist who specializes in marital issues. Several friends of mine have used his services and highly recommended him. Give it a shot and see if he can help." During his third therapy session, Colin was recounting his list of grievances when Dr. Helmar interjected. "Colin, let's face it. You're at a standstill. What I'm asking you to do is to change your mental course. I'm sure you're acquainted with the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. What's often misunderstood is that these stages aren't strictly separate, and they don't always occur in a linear fashion. As I've been listening to you, I've noticed you've touched on all of these stages except acceptance. That's completely normal given what you've been through. However, you've also mentioned your ability to think logically, to solve problems and devise solutions. That's precisely what you need to do now. Set aside the emotional aspects so you can formulate a plan to move forward. Logically, you understand that Celia doesn't want to reconcile. Logically, you grasp that it's futile to pursue someone who doesn't reciprocate your feelings. Until you can come to terms with these realities beyond your control, I might add, you'll remain stagnant. You need to tackle the challenge of life after Celia based on facts, just as you've tackled other obstacles in the past. Colin sat in silence, pondering the counselor's recent words. He came to realize that much of his anguish stemmed from the sudden and unexpected turn of events. There had been no indications, no signs of trouble in their marriage. One moment he was happily married. The next he was facing divorce. One moment he believed in Celia's love. The next he discovered her infidelity. How can I progress when reality feels so uncertain? And how do I move forward with this overwhelming anger? Listening attentively, the counselor absorbed Colin's emotional outpouring. When Colin finally quieted down, Dr. Helmar posed a question. Are you familiar with Reinhold Niebuhr? Colin shook his head, indicating he wasn't. He was a prominent theologian of the 20th century, known for crafting a succinct yet profound prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the Serenity Prayer. I'm familiar with it. It's associated with Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, exactly. In my view, it beautifully captures the journey through the stages of grief. It emphasizes the importance of striving for serenity, acceptance, and wisdom. Until you achieve that, moving forward may prove difficult. After leaving his session that day, Colin couldn't shake Niebuhr's prayer from his thoughts. Serenity. He yearned for it. The question lingered. How could he attain it? What steps could he take to find peace? Following a weekend of deep reflection, he devised a plan. Come Monday, Colin contacted his lawyer. I'll agree to all of Celia's terms if I can have just 30 minutes with her, face to face. Are you certain? The lawyer inquired. These confrontations often escalate, rarely resolving matters in a divorce. This time will be different, I assure you. Arrange it. When Colin entered Celia's attorney's conference room, he was taken aback to find Vince seated next to her, clasping her hand. Well, this is unexpected, Colin mused. But perhaps it's for the best. At least now both Vince and Celia can hear it directly. Celia's attorney motioned for Colin to begin, and he cleared his throat. Celia, I want you to know that this isn't easy for me either. Our relationship didn't unfold as I'd hoped, but I suppose that's life sometimes. Regardless, what's done is done, and it's time for me to move forward. My lawyer informed me of your fair settlement offer, and he's advised me to accept. In the spirit of closure, I'm prepared to do just that. With a decisive gesture, Colin picked up the pen from the table and signed the agreement. As the couple across the table exchanged a glance of relief, he interjected, There's one more thing I'd like to express. The two tensed, unsure of what was to follow. I understand your intention to marry once the divorce is finalized, Colin continued. In the spirit of moving forward, I want to extend my sincere wishes for all the happiness you both deserve in your marriage. With that, he circled the table and shook Vince's hand, who was visibly surprised. Then he leaned in to give Celia a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. As the bewildered lovers observed, he turned and exited the room. They exchanged looks. Did that really just happen? Vince queried. Celia shook her head in disbelief. Wow, unexpected. Then she grinned. But it's great. The last thing I wanted was ongoing conflict every time we encounter him. With the divorce terms settled, it became Colin's responsibility to sell the house they jointly owned. Celia, having already moved into Vince's home, had no attachment to the place. Colin lacked the financial means to buy out Celia, and even if he did, he felt the house was too large for him and held too many memories. Fortunately, the real estate market was thriving, easing the process of selling the house. However, since Colin and Celia had purchased it just 2 years ago, they hadn't accrued much equity, despite the strong market. Consequently, Colin left the closing with only enough cash for a down payment on a 2-bedroom condominium in a desirable development. By the time Colin had sold the old house, moved into his new condo, and settled in, the divorce waiting period was nearly over. Through a friend, Colin discovered that Vince and Celia had already sent out wedding invitations. Despite not receiving one himself, he learned that the couple planned to embark on a week-long Caribbean honeymoon. Colin adjusted his plans accordingly. Upon the sun-tanned couple's return, Vince swept Celia off her feet, preparing to carry her over the threshold. However, upon stepping inside, he noticed an index card slipped under the door with a message: "Check your back deck." Worried, he gently placed his new wife down, grasped her hand, and hurried out to the deck. Initially, nothing seemed amiss, but as he turned, he was taken aback. There sat a gleaming deluxe 3-burner propane gas grill, fully set up and operational. Turning to Celia, Vince questioned, "Did you arrange this?" "I've always desired one, but they're quite pricey." "No," she confessed. "I'm clueless about it." Before she could speculate further, she noticed an envelope taped to the grill's stainless steel hood. Hastening over, she retrieved it and opened it. Reading the card inside, she gasped. "It's from Colin. He wished us well on our marriage." "Colin did this?" Vince asked incredulously. "If this is his way of moving on, then he's more generous than I thought. This is an incredible gift. I'm looking forward to grilling on it this summer." "I must call and thank him," Celia exclaimed, while Vince inspected the grill's features. When Colin answered the phone, he detected a blend of surprise, gratitude, and even a hint of guilt in Celia's tone. "Colin, we've just discovered your wedding gift. I can't believe you bought such an expensive grill for us. It's too generous." Didn't Vince appreciate it? Appreciate it? He's still on the deck admiring it. "Great, that's what I was hoping for. But you didn't have to do this. We didn't even send you a wedding invitation." Colin chuckled. "Of course not. That would have been strange. But I meant what I said. It's time for me to acknowledge what's happened and move forward. The gift is simply my way of showing that, so I hope you and Vince enjoy it." As Celia returned to the deck to inform Vince, he shook his head in amazement. "I've always said he's a better man than I am. Anyway, how about I grill some burgers for dinner tonight, Mrs. Callahan?" As May began, Celia and Vince started planning how to celebrate Mother's Day with Celia's mom. They considered taking her out for brunch at a fancy restaurant, but her mother hesitated. "It's always so chaotic on Mother's Day. I'd be just as happy if you two came here for brunch." So they agreed, and the couple decided to prepare a special meal featuring salmon and vegetables grilled on Vince's new favorite grill. On their way to Celia's mom's house, Celia reminded Vince, "Did you remember to pick up some flowers for Mom?" Smacking his forehead, Vince quickly exited the highway and stopped at a local grocery store. He returned with a dozen pink roses, slightly worse for wear. "They're not in the best condition," he apologized to Celia, "but it's the thought that counts." Upon arrival, after bringing their dishes to the kitchen, Vince handed the roses to Celia's mother along with Mother's Day wishes. "Thank you, Vince. That's very kind," she said. "I'll put them in a vase later." Then she suggested they help themselves in the kitchen and bring the plates to the dining room. "Your dad is famished," she whispered to her daughter. When the food was brought in, Celia couldn't help but admire the extravagant floral display adorning the dining room table. "Mom, those are stunning," she remarked. "Did Dad get those for you?" Her mother chuckled. "Him? He reminded me I'm not his mother. Actually, Colin sent them. Aren't they beautiful?" "Colin." "I know. Wasn't that thoughtful of him?" her mother remarked. As Celia nodded, she noticed a frown briefly appear on her new husband's face. Later that afternoon, when the couple was alone at home and Celia had a moment to herself, she called Colin. "Why did you send that floral arrangement to my mother?" she demanded. "Oh, good, they arrived on time. Did she appreciate them?" "Of course she did," Celia admitted. They were gorgeous. But why did you send them? Colin let out a sigh. Your mother has always been incredibly kind to me, and since my own mother passed away years ago, I've always felt a special connection to her, so I wanted to pay tribute to her. I hope you're okay with that. Oh no, not at all. As I mentioned, she truly appreciated your gesture. It's just unexpected, that's all. But honestly, I'm really grateful for it too. All right. If I haven't made a major blunder, I have a favor to ask. Sure. What is it? It's a bit awkward, but I think it's time for me to dip my toes back into the dating pool. He could sense her hesitation. Colin, I'd feel uncomfortable trying to set you up on a date. No, nothing like that. I just envision bringing someone back to my condo, and right now it's looking a bit bare. More like a bachelor pad. Could I hire you to redecorate? You've always had much better taste than me. Wow, I didn't see that coming, but sure, I suppose I could help with that. I've just wrapped up a big design project, so I can start right away. Is there a time next week when I could come over and take a look? Of course, I'm currently telecommuting 3 days per week, so either Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday suits me. Excellent. I'll schedule to visit on Tuesday afternoon. When Colin invited her into his condo the following Tuesday, Celia quickly noticed what he had been describing. The walls were painted in a dull off-white hue, the carpet looked worn and outdated, and most of the furniture seemed to be salvaged from their previous home. I think there are many possibilities for us to explore here, she remarked after taking in the surroundings. Could you share with me the style you envision? He shrugged his shoulders in a helpless manner. Honestly, Celia, I'm not well versed in style or color theory or any of that. What I really want is for you to create a space that you'd enjoy. He paused, looking around uncertainly before perking up. I don't mean something overly feminine and pink. I want it to clearly reflect a straight male's taste, but not resemble a sports bar either. He gestured towards her. Just somewhere that would appeal to someone with your refined taste, a place where a woman with good taste would feel at home. You're the only one I trust to pull it off. That's very flattering, Colin. I think I understand exactly what you're after. Let me return to my studio and draft a plan. I'll then present you with some options and we can decide what works best for you. Perfect. Thank you, Celia. I really appreciate your help. Over the following 2 months, Celia and Colin ended up meeting nearly once a week. They had to choose a design plan, go over and refine proposed decorations, and then supervise the renovations they had agreed upon. Afterwards, Celia was constantly bringing fabric samples, paint swatches, and furniture photos for Colin's approval. Colin was satisfied with the progress, but Vince felt differently. Do you really have to keep meeting with that guy so frequently? He complained to his wife one evening after she had returned from yet another visit to Colin's apartment. Oh, come on, dear. I don't see Colin any more frequently than I do any other client. And besides, I thought you were okay with him, especially after his wedding gift to us. I think he has truly moved on from the past, she reassured. Yeah, maybe. But you and him have a history, and I can't help but wonder if he's completely over you. Well, I'm completely over him. In fact, if you join me in the bedroom, I'll show you just how over him I really am. Although Celia believed she had calmed Vince's jealousy, she dreaded that Colin's next inquiry might reignite her husband's anger. During one of her visits, he suddenly asked, Are you still part of a book club? Yes, I am. We meet every other Saturday afternoon. Why do you ask? Is the club exclusively for women, or would they be open to a man joining? I'm not sure. I don't think we've ever had a man express interest. Are you thinking of joining? Actually, I am. I mentioned wanting to start dating again, but I struggle with what to talk about with women. Most of the women I know aren't into sports, so we might not have much in common. I thought if I knew more about the books they read, it could give me a conversation starter. She nodded. That makes sense. Actually, that's quite insightful of you. How about this? I'll bring up the idea at our next meeting. If they're okay with it, I'll let you know, and you can attend the following one. If not, I can still inform you of the book choice so you can read it on your own. I really appreciate it, Celia. Of course, I'd prefer to join the discussion and hear what the group thinks about the book. But if they're uncomfortable with a man being there, I'll read it solo. When Celia raised the topic with her book club friends, she was pleasantly surprised to discover their enthusiasm for Colin joining their group. As long as you're comfortable with your ex-husband being there, we'd welcome a male perspective, they assured her. Celia found it amusing that the two single ladies seemed particularly excited about Colin joining. During Colin's inaugural meeting, he managed to win over even those who had initially expressed reservations. Unlike a few of the women, Colin had actually completed the book and offered several insightful comments. However, he also made sure not to dominate the conversation. Celia was relieved to see that Colin respected differing opinions and consistently encouraged others to share their thoughts. By the end of the session, everyone hailed the experiment as a tremendous success, showering Colin with hugs as they departed. Celia observed that the single members in particular were notably enthusiastic in expressing their gratitude. Not only did Colin attend the subsequent meeting, but he also extended an invitation for the group to convene at his newly refurbished condominium. Upon arrival, the women marveled at the decor for the first half hour, with Colin ensuring credit was given to Celia for the transformation. Traditionally, the host of the meeting would provide snacks and drinks. Colin exceeded expectations by offering a selection of charcuterie boards and several bottles of Prosecco to keep the conversation flowing smoothly. Although the ensuing book discussion may not have been intellectually stimulating, it was certainly lively. As the gathering wound down, expressions of gratitude filled the room. Kelly, a charming young redhead among the guests, was particularly effusive in her thanks, prompting Celia to invent a pretext to separate Colin from her persistent appreciation. Once the others had departed, Celia lingered behind, offering assistance with tidying up. Colin accepted gratefully. After they had cleared away the used dishes and glasses, he escorted her to the door. Taking her hands in his, he expressed his gratitude for her help and for her support throughout the gathering. Celia shook her head. Actually, it's me who should be thanking you. Everyone seemed to enjoy themselves, and I believe you contributed greatly to our conversations. Your compliments about the decor were also very kind. You're most welcome, he replied. And thanks for rescuing me from Kelly, he added with a playful grin. Instantly her posture became rigid. Colin, you should be cautious around her. She's a nice girl, but she's a bit too young for you. And from what I've heard, she's quite the seductress, if you catch my drift. He nodded seriously, concealing his amusement at her reaction. Celia's smile returned. I should head home now, but thank you once again for everything. She leaned in to give him a hug and a peck on the cheek. Then she pulled back, scrutinizing him. It's like I'm discovering a different side of you, Colin. I like it. With another kiss on his cheek, she turned and departed. Upon learning about the latest addition to the book club of the series, Vince was visibly upset and insisted that she exclude Colin from future meetings. Celia showed obvious annoyance in response. I will not obey, she retorted. The other members like his company and he benefits our group. Stop being jealous, Winks. Nothing happens and you make a fool of yourself. Despite the fact that Vince kept his emotions under control, that night he felt a strong desire to confirm his connection with his wife. Their intimacy was especially intense, and Vince seemed eager to assert his control. Sensing his motives, Celia decided not to object, instead feigning pleasure. After that, she kissed him and expressed her gratitude, and they fell asleep. The following morning, Vince timidly apologized for his previous behavior towards her, but she dismissed his concerns. I wouldn't want it to be like that all the time, she assured him. But occasionally, a change of pace is welcomed. Relieved, he left for work with a spring in his step. However, once he departed, her forced smile quickly faded. Slipping into a sundress, Celia realized she was still feeling sore from the previous night, prompting her to take another capsule. After downing it with her breakfast, she drove to her design studio to review the agenda for the upcoming week. Upon noticing that a rug for Colin's apartment had been delivered, she promptly phoned him to offer to deliver it. His approval motivated her. After a quick check of her makeup, she set off in his direction. After allowing her to enter, she quickly placed a small rug in the space reserved for it. Colin admired her choice and invited her to stay for a minute and have a cup of coffee. She agreed without hesitation. However, when she sat down on his new sofa, a grimace appeared on her face, which immediately attracted Colin's attention. "Is everything okay, Celia?" he asked in a worried tone. "It's okay," she replied. "Vince was a little bit pushy last night, and I'm feeling a little overwhelmed this morning, that's all." She couldn't help but notice his frown, but that expression quickly turned to determination. Without saying a word, he pushed the coffee table away from the sofa. Then he took out his new rug and spread it out in front of her. Placing a pillow in the center, he motioned for her to lie down on the carpet. She protested weakly, but gave in when he insisted. As soon as she lay face down on the carpet with a pillow under her hips, he began to rub her neck, starting at the base of her skull. And he began to knead her whole body, and over time all the discomfort she was experiencing disappeared. "God, Colin, it feels divine." "I'm turning to mush," she exclaimed. He didn't say anything. Instead, he gently lowered her legs and began massaging them, and then ran his fingertips over her skin. A smile played on his lips when he noticed that her breathing had quickened. Gradually, the massage turned into intimacy. Celia had an indescribable pleasure. After a short while, he turned onto his back, and Celia wriggled to drape her arm over him, resting her head on his chest. She began to speak but halted, refraining from verbalizing her thoughts. Instead, she nestled closer, relishing the warmth of his body. Their tranquil breathing was interrupted by Celia's phone ringing. Initially tempted to ignore it, she reluctantly retrieved her phone from her bag. Seeing the caller ID, she sat up straight and answered. "Hey Vince, what's going on?" "Sorry for missing your earlier call. I was out running errands." "No, I'm free right now." "Sure, lunch sounds good. Where do you want to meet?" "Okay, great. I can be there in half an hour. Love you, babe." She turned to Colin with an apologetic glance. "I'm sorry. I have to go." Hastily, she made her way to his guest bathroom to freshen up. Upon re-emerging, she headed for the door. Pausing before leaving, she turned to him. "We need to talk. I'll call you." Colin nodded in understanding, and she vanished. During their lunch together, Vince again began to press Celia for details about her whereabouts and activities, but she simply repeated her previous excuses. In the end, he dropped the subject, sensing a subtle change in her behavior, but unable to pinpoint exactly what had changed. Later that evening, despite her protests, Vince insisted on intimacy, ignoring her fatigue. Celia managed to take a shower at home after Vince returned to his office, fearing that he might discover evidence of her affair. Fortunately, Colin's gentle treatment left no trace of her indiscretion. Despite the relief she felt when Vince finally fell asleep, Celia couldn't help but think about how she'd spent the morning with Colin, and it made her have vivid, sensual dreams. Once again, she pretended to be pleased with Vince, which perhaps only increased the sharpness of her dreams. The next day, Colin was deep in work at the computer in his home office when his phone rang. Glancing at the screen, he wasn't surprised to see Celia's name. She asked for a meeting to talk, and he immediately invited her in. After finishing the conversation, he completed the report he was preparing for his office, and then sent a text message to another phone. After receiving a notification from the condominium security system and confirming that it was Celia, he sent a message and let her in. When he opened the front door, he was greeted by Celia with a worried expression on his face. She came in and he closed the door behind her, staring at her intently. "Colin, we need to discuss what happened yesterday," she began, but he silenced her by putting a finger to her lips. She stared at him, puzzled, until he moved closer and replaced his finger with a kiss. "Oh my God," she breathed out, responding to the kiss. He took her to his bedroom. Unlike the previous time, there was no gradual escalation. Colin was impatient, and Celia was already ready when she entered his apartment. They repeated yesterday's meeting, only with triple force. Vince was at his desk when he received an anonymous text on his personal cell. It said, "To locate Celia, look in Colin's bedroom." "Who is this?" he messaged back, but received no response. Normally, he would have disregarded a text from an unfamiliar number, but this message intensified the paranoia he had been experiencing lately. He quickly grabbed his car keys, rushed to the office garage, and sped off to Colin's condominium. Celia wasn't sure what she wanted when she arrived at Colin's that morning, but now, all she cared about was feeling Colin as much as possible. Vince ran into Colin's apartment complex and screeched to a stop when he spotted Celia's car. Ignoring the search for a parking spot, he braked sharply in front of the main entrance. Jumping out of the car, he noticed a local man getting out and hurried to close the armored door before it closed. Once inside, he paused briefly to get his bearings in the hallway before climbing the stairs to the second floor, deciding not to use the elevator so that Colin and Celia would not hear him. After descending the stairs, he went straight to the entrance to Colin's apartment. At first, he thought about forcibly entering, but was surprised to find that the door was unlocked and enjoyed Colin's nonchalance. Once inside, he made his way cautiously to the master bedroom, guided by the unmistakable sounds Celia was making. As soon as he got to the door, Celia and Colin finished. "What the hell, Celia? How could you betray me like that? Especially with him," Vince roared. "How could you betray me like that, especially with him?" Taken aback, she swiftly turned her head to spot the individual she had been avoiding the most. Vince stood there, visibly in anguish and fury, his fists clenched, tears streaming down his cheeks. "No, Vince, please let me explain," she began, but Vince refused to listen. "There's nothing to explain, you unfaithful woman. You've shattered my heart. I never want to lay eyes on you again." With those words, he pivoted and stumbled out of the room, making his way toward the exit. "Wait, Vince, don't go. You don't mean that. Just give me a moment," Celia pleaded, hastily dressing herself to follow her husband. Colin silently observed Celia's departure. Then he dressed himself and returned to his office. Noticing the disposable phone he had left on his desk, he picked it up and tossed it into the trash. "I doubt I'll have any use for that anymore," he mused to himself. As the phone landed at the bottom of the bin, the last text he had sent flashed on the screen. "If you want to locate Celia, try Colin's bedroom." While he was still engrossed in work, a hesitant knock at the front door disrupted him. Upon opening it, Celia entered, dragging a sizable rolling suitcase behind her. As she turned to him, Colin noticed her swollen, teary eyes and smudged makeup. "Vince threw me out," she confessed, her voice trembling. "How's he holding up?" Colin inquired. "He's falling apart," she confided. "One moment he was yelling at me, the next he was in tears. I could barely make out his words. All I understood was that my presence was tormenting him and he wanted me gone as soon as possible." She sighed. "I'm really worried about him, but I'm at a loss for what to do." Colin nodded sympathetically. "I can relate." Her solemn expression turned brighter. "But now we can finally be together openly. We don't need to conceal our emotions anymore." She reached out to hug him, only to be stopped by his response. "I don't think so." His words, and especially his tone, left her puzzled. "What did you say?" she inquired. "Well, Celia, you're correct. We don't need to hide our feelings any longer." And my feelings are that I wouldn't take you back even if you were the last woman on earth. It would be foolish to welcome back a cheater. No, a repeat offender. Into my life. His outburst stunned her, but she swiftly attempted to regain control. Maybe I did wrong, Vince, but it was my way of compensating for leaving you. Now that I'm back, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving how loving and loyal I can be. You're quite something, Colin scoffed. You treat men like replaceable parts. Grow tired of one, switch to another. If the second one fails, no worries, just return to the first. That's not fair, Colin. Besides, you pursued me. You seduced me. He sarcastically nodded in agreement. Oh, of course I understand. All it takes is for some guy to be polite to you, offer a few compliments, maybe give you a gift, and you'll be quick to act. No, it's not like that. It's exactly like that. And I'm certain if I were to take you back, the same thing would happen all over again. Well, I have news for you, Celia. I've seen your true colors. As the song goes, we are never, ever, ever getting back together. He strode over to the front door, swung it open, and hurled her bag into the hallway. Leave! He shouted. Tears streamed down her face, her breath hitching with sobs. Oh God, I can't believe this is happening. Where am I supposed to go? He folded his arms across his chest. If you want my advice, I suggest straight to hell. Shrinking in the face of his anger, she stumbled backward through the doorway, and Colin swiftly slammed it shut, ensuring to bolt it this time. Then he made his way to the sofa and collapsed onto it, feeling the adrenaline slowly dissipate from his system. As he started to unwind, he reflected on all that had transpired. He pondered what Dr. Helmar might opine about the situation, considering he had followed at least some of the doctor's advice. He managed to glean the insight to identify areas for change and summon the courage to enact them, even if it meant swallowing his pride at times. However, he left the task of finding peace to Vince and Celia. He shook his head. It seemed unlikely that either of them would easily find tranquility. Vince must come to terms with his impending divorce and the realization of his cuckoldry. Meanwhile, Celia must confront her infidelity and impending divorce for the second time. A wry smile touched his lips. Perhaps he should recommend Dr. Helmar to them. Content, he surveyed his renovated condo, pleased with the transformation. Returning to his office, he settled at his desk. There, he noticed the card bearing Kelly's name and number. Scribbled on the back was a message. Give me a call sometime. He nodded to himself. I believe I'm prepared to do just that.